Good morning, all the colleagues. It's always great to be back in the UNICEF family. I'm so grateful, Mark, to you and your colleagues for inviting me to speak and share the story about young people's participation in the Sustainable Development Goals. I think going back to one of the biggest lessons learned during the MDG process was the Millennium Summit. And I think in one of my interviews with a young person who attended the Millennium Summit, she said to me in Mexico City, she said, Ravi, I came to the summit, it was extremely euphoric. But then a week later, it was full of disappointment because nobody talked about how young people participate in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. A few years ago, when I was asked by UN Millennium Campaign to provide advice to them on how do we strengthen children and young people's participation in Sustainable Development Goals, we looked at one or two strategies. The first strategy was really to bring together all the different actors so that we can all be coordinated and synergize our efforts on bringing the voices of the most marginalized children and young people. There are, of course, offline and online processes that took on as we go back into the making of the SDGs from a young people's perspective. So I think the first conversation was really with the World We Want 2015 platform, which was one of the biggest big data platform created, where all the different discussions are still housed at in the World We Want 2030.org, which is the new incarnation of the website, or I would say the engagement platform. I think UNICEF played a critical role in organizing e-consultations, but also houses about declarations coming from 100 national country consultations. To many of them, for the first time, young people participated. So we saw in the last few years young people participating in national consultations, in thematic consultations, especially the one UNICEF and UN Women co-chaired, which was the inequality, but also the one ILO did about youth employment, the one UNDP did on political participation. Having said that, I think there was also another big question mark on how young people will take on the online survey, which was conducted by a UN Millennium Campaign, very much called the Secretary General's My World 2015 survey. And I remember having a conversation with various colleagues and saying that, will young people participate in the My World survey? And there was a big question mark because we've never had such a high number of young people participate. As we speak right now on the website, if you go to it's data.myworld2015.org, you see very clearly about 10 million people participating from 193 countries. And I'm very, very glad to say that out of that 10 million, 7 million were young people from all these different countries. Now, one can argue and say that are these young people sitting with mobile phones, laptops who are participating? You'll be surprised that 80% of people and young people who participated really used offline paper ballots to participate. And here are one or two examples that I would like to give you. A young advocate from Cameroon, Divine, actually conducted focus group discussions in slums and rural communities, including with young people with disabilities. We had a young person in Pune who actually participated and mobilized young people from slums to get their perspective on paper ballots. The Mexico City Youth Institute reached out to adolescents and young people and had over 1.6 million votes from favelas and really bringing the voices of the voiceless. The Scouts in Philippines brought about 40,000 votes from My World, reaching out to adolescent girls and adolescent boys there. So of course, as we speak right now, I would say very happy to say that young people crashed the My World survey. But I think where we need to do is analysis of what are young people. I remember in my days with UNICEF, people said, do young people participate? Will they participate in decisions that affect them? Article 12 of the CRC. But what has happened now is that given the opportunity, young people from around the world participated in the My World survey and told us what their top 7 priorities are. Across the world, young people said education, education, and education is their number 1 priority. The issue of health came as an important piece, but if you look at and scrutinize what they said in the online discussions and focus group discussions, mental health came as a very important point of discussion. issues of job opportunities. But here again, it was interesting in shift that young people did not only talk about, education system that needs to be reformed to create employment, but how do you bring in the entrepreneurial thinking as we evolve in the life cycle? Ending all forms of violence was prioritized, especially with adolescent girls and young women who talked about ending gender-based violence. Adolescent boys talked about ending, organized armed violence. And we also saw a very strong discussion about achieving gender equality, but also achieving all forms of equality and creating social inclusion. Furthermore, we also saw young people discuss issues of climate change, sustainability, peace and security, and the list can go on. But the important piece is that in the initial discussion as we move forward on sustainable development goals, we see that through the gender parity, I should have said that 49% of people who participated were women and girls who in the survey. So I would say, going back the last 3 years, to say that, for the first time we saw consultations with children, adolescents and young people, women and various groups bringing forward their discussion. Where we stand together is, of course, the 17 goals behind me. But each 17 goal has to come to a realization, and it can only come to a realization that 50% of global humanity has to be part of it, which is children and young people. And I think Eastern Africa plays a very, very critical role in this process. So we saw finally, I would say, along the entire process, we saw the participation, I would say, through really voicing their issues, expressing their priorities, participating in offline and online consultations, using creative methodologies such as art, theater, but also using technology to express themselves. I think that's what we really come together. So where are we moving forward as we look at this opportunity in the implementation and the localization of sustainable development goals? I think UNICEF is such a critical position because we know for a fact that in 2025, we'll have the next youth bulge coming in Africa, which means we'll have more children, we'll have more adolescents, and we'll have more youth. And also means that somebody has to respond to where young people see their priorities. And I would say that where we can align ourselves is really to support children-led organizations, youth-led organizations to become our partners, and really underlining SDG 17, which is becoming partners of creating awareness on what the sustainable development goals are. Many children and young people, I remember working for UNICEF Turkey 4 years ago in the Youth Leadership Academy, many of them have said they had never heard of Millennium Development Goals. We cannot do the same mistake. I think every child and a young person has a right to know what the world leaders pledged and adopted on September 26th. So the first and foremost is creating awareness with and for children and young people. The second is really opening opportunities where child-led organizations, youth groups can become actors and partners in the implementation of sustainable development goals. I'll pick on SDG number 5, where how adolescent girls and young women and their organization can be strengthened in achieving various targets and indicators that reflect their priorities, but also working with boys and young men to become partners of gender equality. And along with this, I would also say that something which we had conceived, and I think many of you are already working on, is how do you work with children and young people to become eyes and ears, really to look at and monitor the implementation, I would say, children and young people's barometer to see is the Sustainable Development Goals implementation progression, is that really implementing and changing the lives of children and young people? And that's where you can really be innovative. And I think in East or Central Africa, you have been extremely innovative by the U report. But I think we can also look at other ways by which we can bring both offline and online, traditional and progressive methodologies and technologies to monitor the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and how that is impacting children and young people. And last not the least is really, is to really create a culture of accountability. I think that's something which is kind of embedded in an SDG 16, so that the most marginalized, excluded girls and boys, adolescent girls and boys can benefit. and again would underline the importance of SDG 10 on inequality, which is so critical. And I think with UNICEF, with all of you who are very important leaders and influencers, I would say that there's a huge opportunity to strengthen children's participation and participation of young people in the implementation and localization of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm so happy and very happy to be available on Skype to take any questions, any reflections, and I've also sent a list of documents that are available for you to review. And I'm always there, to be available to provide any support where I can. Thank you so much again for asking me to speak today. Thank you.